There is a profound difference between someone loving your presence and someone craving access to your mind. Most people never recognize that difference until they have already been psychologically consumed by it. Because manipulation rarely begins with force. It begins with curiosity disguised as intimacy. A person studies you carefully, not always because they admire you, but because understanding you gives them influence over you. Carl Jung often spoke about the hidden dimensions of human behavior, the unconscious motives people themselves do not fully understand. And this is important because many manipulative individuals are not consciously thinking, "I want control." What they seek is emotional certainty. They want reassurance that they can enter your inner world whenever they choose. They want to know what affects you, what wounds you carry, what makes you feel validated, rejected, insecure, or needed. Once those emotional entry points are discovered, influence becomes easier. This is why, in the beginning, the attention can feel intoxicating. She asks deep questions. She remembers small details. She appears emotionally invested in every part of your life. But slowly, something changes. The conversations stop feeling mutual and start feeling investigative. Your reactions become more important than your reality. Your emotional state becomes something she monitors, adjusts, and tests. You begin noticing that certain behaviors are designed to pull psychological responses out of you. Silence becomes a test. Distance becomes a test. Affection becomes conditional. Confusion becomes strategic. One moment you feel deeply valued, and the next you feel emotionally destabilized. This inconsistency is not random chaos. It creates dependency. Because the human mind naturally seeks resolution, and the more uncertain you become, the more mentally occupied you are by the person creating the uncertainty. Jung understood that whatever dominates the unconscious mind eventually shapes behavior. And this is exactly why psychological access is so powerful. If someone can occupy your thoughts long enough, they can influence your decisions, your confidence, your emotional stability, even your identity. You start explaining yourself excessively. You replay conversations in your head. You seek approval from the same person, creating the emotional imbalance. And the dangerous part is that many people mistake this obsession for love. But love does not require psychological captivity. Genuine connection does not demand constant emotional access. Real intimacy respects individuality, while manipulation slowly erodes it. The moment someone needs continuous control over your attention, your reactions, and your emotional state, the relationship stops being about connection and starts becoming about possession. And perhaps the most dangerous prison is the one built inside your own mind. What makes psychological control so effective is that it rarely appears aggressive in the beginning. In fact, it often disguises itself as care, concern, affection, or emotional closeness. But beneath the surface, there is another dynamic unfolding. A quiet need to remain at the center of your mental and emotional world at all times. Some people do not simply want to be part of your life. They want to dominate your attention. They want your thoughts returning to them constantly, even in their absence. Because attention, psychologically speaking, is power. Whatever occupies the mind begins shaping emotional reality. And manipulative individuals understand this instinctively, even if they cannot fully explain it themselves. This is why emotional monitoring becomes one of their most subtle forms of control. They pay close attention to your tone, your reactions, your timing, your emotional shifts. At first, it may feel flattering. You think, this person really notices me. But over time, you realize they are not simply observing you. They are calibrating you, learning which behaviors make you anxious, learning what gains your immediate response, learning how to pull your focus back toward them whenever it starts drifting elsewhere. Carl Jung believed that human beings are deeply influenced by unconscious patterns, and one of the strongest unconscious desires is the desire for significance. Manipulative people exploit this by creating emotional cycles that keep you psychologically engaged. One day they give warmth, validation, affection. The next day they become distant, cold, or unpredictable. The inconsistency itself becomes addictive because the mind naturally seeks emotional resolution. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin organizing your emotional state around their behavior. Their mood determines your peace. Their approval determines your confidence. Their silence determines your anxiety. You stop living internally and start living reactively. This is where emotional monitoring becomes dangerous, because it trains you to abandon your center. You become hyper, aware of them, while becoming disconnected from yourself. Your nervous system starts anticipating emotional shifts before they even happen. You overanalyze messages, facial expressions, pauses in conversation. You are no longer experiencing the relationship naturally. You are psychologically managing instability. And the manipulator often interprets this hyper-focus as proof of emotional attachment, when in reality it is a symptom of emotional conditioning. The deeper tragedy is that many strong people fall into this pattern not because they are weak, but because they are emotionally sincere. They assume the other person values connection the same way they do. But sincerity becomes dangerous when it is offered without boundaries, because those who seek control are always searching for unrestricted access to another person's emotional world. The moment your peace depends on someone else's unpredictability, your mind is no longer fully your own. And that is how control quietly replaces connection. The real shift did not happen the day you confronted her. It happened the day you stopped giving her uninterrupted access to your mind. And most people will never understand how powerful that moment truly is, because externally, almost nothing changes at first. You still speak, you still respond, you still appear calm, but internally, the door begins to close. You stop explaining every emotion. You stop defending every misunderstanding. You stop feeling obligated to react instantly to emotional pressure. And this is important because manipulators survive through reaction. Your confusion feeds them. Your emotional urgency feeds them. Your need to be understood feeds them. But once you become psychologically still, their influence weakens. Carl Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, requires separating your identity from external control. In other words, maturity begins when your inner state is no longer dictated by another person's approval, rejection, or unpredictability. And this is exactly what started happening inside you. You no longer replayed every conversation for hours, searching for hidden meaning. You no longer felt compelled to fix every emotional distance immediately. Silence stopped terrifying you. Space stopped feeling like abandonment. For the first time, your mind belonged to you again. What disturbed her was not your anger. Anger still contains emotional attachment. What unsettled her was your emotional discipline. Your calmness removed the emotional hooks she once relied on. Because the moment a person can no longer control your inner world, they begin losing control of the relationship itself. And sometimes the most powerful thing a human being
One of
can
the
do
greatest
misunderstandings in human
relationships
to their own mind is the belief that boundaries are acts of cruelty. In reality, boundaries are often the final defense of psychological health. When you finally closed the door, it was not an act of revenge. It was an act of preservation. Because after enough emotional exhaustion, a person eventually realizes that constant access to their mind comes with a cost. Every unnecessary argument drains energy. Every manipulation creates mental noise. Every emotional test slowly weakens clarity. And over time, you begin understanding that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche cannot become whole while constantly surrendering itself to external domination. Individuation requires separation from forces that consume your identity. And this is why emotional distance became essential for you. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about your own psychological stability as well. You no longer felt responsible for managing someone else's emotional chaos. You stopped mistaking guilt for love. You stopped believing that enduring constant emotional pressure was proof of loyalty. Instead, you recognized a deeper truth. Access to you should be earned through respect, not demanded through manipulation. And perhaps this was the moment your transformation truly began. Because becoming emotionally unavailable to manipulation does not make you cold. It makes you conscious. It means you no longer allow every criticism, silence, mood shift, or emotional performance to invade your inner world. Some doors are not closed out of hatred. They are closed because peace finally became more important than emotional survival. And the strongest boundary is often the one built silently within the mind. The greatest transformation in your life did not happen when you changed another person. It happened when you finally understood the value of your own attention. Because attention is far more powerful than most people realize. Whatever receives consistent access to your mind eventually begins shaping your emotions, your decisions, your identity, and your sense of self. This is why the ability to guard your inner world is one of the highest forms of psychological strength. Carl Jung believed that until a person becomes conscious of the forces influencing them, they remain controlled by them unconsciously. And many people spend years unknowingly surrendering their emotional energy to individuals who thrive on confusion, dependency, and reaction. They allow someone else's approval to define their confidence, someone else's silence to define their peace, someone else's instability to define their emotional state. But maturity begins the moment you interrupt that pattern. You realized that not everyone deserves unrestricted access to your thoughts, your emotions, or your vulnerability. Some people enter your life seeking connection, while others enter seeking influence. And learning the difference changes everything. Because once you stopped feeding emotional chaos with your attention, the dynamic lost its power over you. You became calmer, more observant, less reactive, and in that emotional discipline, you discovered something deeper than control. You discovered freedom. Real power was never forcing someone to respect you. Real power was developing enough self-awareness to stop abandoning yourself in order to keep others comfortable. At the end of every psychological battle, one question remains: who has access to your mind? Because the quality of your life is ultimately shaped by the things you allow to live inside it.